He usually joins the Sports Bash every day at 4, but today we're only live from 1 to 4. So John McMullen joins us at 2. So we're sticking with the even numbers. Josh Hennig along with Dashawn Hendricks live in the Matt Black Kia Studios on 97.3 ESPN. Joining us now, like I said, is John McMullen. Follow him on Twitter at JF McMullen for all your Eagles and NFL news. John also used to cover the NBA and WWE, so maybe we'll get into some NBA talk with him as the All-Star Game weekend just ended. John, I just want to know, did you watch the NBA All-Star Game yesterday?
I did not. In fact, I put that out on Twitter today, and I was interested, and I got the answer. And I don't know if this is everybody, but I have never had less interest in All-Star games from any sport. And I wondered if that was just an impact of getting older, because I loved All-Star games as a kid. To me, it seemed like something for the kids. And everybody basically agreed. So maybe it's just as simple as that. It's not nearly as big as a thing, because when we grow up, we realize how meaningless they really are.
Well, I was going to say, John, I thought it might be because of the fact that, and I know this for me, the longer you're involved in this medium of covering sports and watching it and talking to players, that you become less of a pure fan, and you become more and more, you're invested in it because it's what you cover and it's what you're interested in, what you do, but you become less of a fan purely of it.
Well, yeah, that's part of it too, and that's why I threw it out there, because I was interested to see if the casual fan went about things the same way, and it seems to be both, because I agree with you. I've been covering sports for too long. It really doesn't excite me anymore, and I get that part of it. You kind of put that aside, but I think for the average fan, they kind of answered in the same way, and they feel the same way. So maybe it is. Maybe we just have to accept the fact that it's something for the kids and stop grousing about it, because everybody's trying to reinvent the All-Star Game, reinvent the wheel, and do different things, and it's never going to be compelling to anyone other than kids, I think. And maybe that's, hey, there's nothing wrong with that. It's acceptable. Let them have their fun, and then we move on to the real stuff.
All right, let's touch on some of the real stuff. So first of all, tomorrow is the day that teams can start tagging players. I know there's a lot of rumors about who could or couldn't be tagged around the NFL. I know some people said the Patriots could tag Gostkowski. Some people are bringing up the fact that Landon Collins can be tagged by the Giants. If you were to put the odds right now on the Eagles tagging Nick Foles as of 2:06 on Monday, February 18th, what are your odds right now, John?
My odds have stayed pretty consistent. I don't think it makes a lot of sense from the Eagles' perspective, so I put it at 80-20 that they will not tag him. I just don't. Remember, I think people don't understand that it's easy to say tag him and trade him, but you can't trade him until the start of the new league year, which is March 13th. Now, obviously, there's a lot of backroom dealings and such, but what that requires you to do is not only does Nick have to sign the tag, you also have to create that space, because you have to be under the cap. It's a top 51 rule in the off season to fit Nick Foles. Even if it's for 2 minutes, you still have to create that $25 million of space. And that's going to be very difficult to do right away for the Eagles without probably putting askew some of their off-season plans. So ultimately, I just, hey, wait a year and get a compensatory pick that year. I think that's probably the best way to go for the Eagles.
So, John, basically how you see this playing out is that do you believe that the Eagles will first franchise tag him? And if they do, obviously that means they're going to just settle on whatever trade they can get for him, correct?
Well, I can't imagine they would put the tag on him without having a trade in place, because that's exactly how long they want that $25 million on their books is about 2 minutes. So that's going to be one of those things where Howie's going to be talking to people at the combine and trying to work out a deal and seeing, I think, and I've said it consistently, I think the bigger thing for the Eagles is keeping him out of the division and steering him in another direction, whether that's Jacksonville, Miami, or somewhere else, and not the Giants or Redskins. I think that's more important to the Eagles than a third-round pick. So I think if they can steer him away, it's possible they put the tag on him. If they can't, and I think that's the more likely scenario, and that's why I put it at 80-20, they can't afford to tag him.
John, when you look at obviously the Eagles had a down year and everything that happened as far as the Carson Wentz, Nick Foles stuff, when the Eagles and Howie Roseman, Doug Peterson, their brass go into this offseason, starting at the combine where they're watching these prospects, when they go into free agency in the draft, what is the number one thing that you believe that they say, okay, this is priority A as far as a player at any position that we need to make sure that we get on our team to upgrade our roster?
Well, I think the biggest priority should be running back. However, I don't think that's a position where you have to concern yourself necessarily with a first-round pick. A lot of it depends on what's done in free agency before the draft. But, you know, Howie Roseman has called this already an historic draft from a defensive line standpoint. So I would lean towards that more in the draft because while the Eagles' defensive line has arguably been the strength of their team over the past 2 seasons, Brandon Graham's scheduled to be a free agent. You have age issues. Chris Long might retire. Michael Bennett continues to age. You have some concerns of what's going to happen with Tim Jernigan inside. So this is a year where you can replenish up front. And I think the Eagles need to get younger, and they need to do that. So I think running back is they need more talent there, but I just don't think they value that position that high in the draft.
John McMullen joined us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline on 97.3 ESPN FM. Check out all of his work at 97.3 ESPN.com. John, is there a guy, you mentioned that Nick Foles is very unlikely to be tagged, but is there a guy currently who could be tagged? Is there someone that you look at and say, you know, the Eagles could tag this guy for whatever reason?
No, from the Eagles' perspective, the only guy they're going to tag is Nick Foles. Outside the league, there's a lot of guys. You mentioned some of them. I would look at the edge rushers. DeMarcus Lawrence if the Cowboys can't work out a long-term deal, he's going to get tagged. Jadeveon Clowney, if they can't work out a long-term deal in Houston, he probably gets tagged. But I don't think the Eagles would consider that with Brandon Graham. And unfortunately, it looks like they might be going in a different direction because I think that would be a mistake. I think they should bring Brandon back, but you can't afford to franchise tag a player like that.
John, how would you set up the priorities of the Eagles offseason? Obviously, the Eagles don't want Nick Foles to go to an individual rival. We know Howie Roseman talked about in the draft, there's a deep defensive line draft. We know the Eagles, there's some questions for them at the DN position in the secondary. So where do you think the Eagles are going to prioritize their offseason shopping list?
Well, I think there's 3 things that are of major concern. One is replenishing that defensive line, as I said. One is getting an answer at the running back position finally. And then the third, I think they need a clear plan for Jason Peters and whether he's going to be back for another year, his heir apparent. So I think the clock's got to start on that. Now, a lot of people just assume it's Jordan Mailata. I don't know if the Eagles feel that way. That's too raw of a prospect. I don't think they're sitting there and saying, there's no doubt that he's going to be our left tackle. And I think if the Eagles screw that up, I think people are going to realize how good this organization has had it for a very long time, ever since Jason Peters got here, because If you look around, not only the NFL, but also if you've been watching the AAF, there aren't a lot of good offensive linemen out there. So you got to get people in the pipeline, and you got to get that plan to succeed Jason Peters, whether it's this year or next year. You got to get moving on that.
Who are some candidates to be cap casualties for the Eagles? Every team every year seems to cut, one guy that maybe people didn't expect or trade a guy that people didn't expect. Who are some guys that you look at and say, you know what, the Eagles could maybe do without that number on their cap?
Well, I think there's a lot of questions that have to be answered. Nelson Aguilar is a perfect example, coming up on his fifth-year rookie option, which is just under $10 million. I can't imagine the Eagles want to pay him that final year's salary on his rookie deal. So it comes down to, can they work out an extension that lowers that number? If they can't, he would be in that conversation for them to move on, potentially re-signing Golden Tate. I think one of those two will be back, but not both. I think Jason Peters, we just mentioned, at his age, with his injury history, you're always concerned, and they could possibly move on from him. I think they need to do something with Jason Kelsey. Those retirement rumors, he's not going to be a cap casualty by any stretch of the imagination, but he's clearly not happy. So the Eagles have to work out some kind of extension where they get him some guaranteed money. And Tim Jernigan, because of the rework deal, and the Eagles can kind of walk away with it with no penalty. They either have to make a decision. Is he going to be all right from a health standpoint? If he is, and if this team wants him in their future, they're going to have to work out a restructured deal.
John, we were talking a little bit earlier, and I want to touch on this with you, about the fact of the popularity of different sports and how sports promote them. And we were having this conversation, Dashawn and I, partially based on the issues with baseball and their free agency, but also based on the fact that you have a guy, Adam Silver, who, there are reports that people, courted him to come to the NFL, and he didn't. I've always said that, and, people have mentioned my tweet online, and people have probably seen your tweets about this as well. And I want to bring this topic in here, which is the NBA and the NFL are just run differently. But both of them have done one thing well, which is they've done a better job at promoting their games and their sports than baseball and hockey have. And to me, the great differentiator, even though the NFL is a reactionary league and the NBA is a little bit less of a reactionary league, both of them have done one thing well, which is promote their sports, and not just promote it, but promote it to a younger demographic. Whereas to me, baseball and hockey, their upper management and their ownerships are so archaic that their sports are dying with the generation that watch them.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I hear what you're saying. I agree with it. Certainly with Major League Baseball, I don't think NHL was ever at the level at that point to lose significant popularity. But baseball certainly has. The NFL, I would argue the weakest part of that organization, which generates $15 billion a year now, is the way they handle public relations issues. So I'm not sure if I give them credit for the popularity of that league. I just think it harkens back to it's bulletproof, because no matter how many fans complain, and believe me, they're on Twitter complaining about everything every single day. Bottom line is, when the game's on, what happens? They watch. Doesn't matter. They can complain about the officiating, social activism, any controversy there is, Colin Kaepernick, you name it. They can say what they want on Twitter, but when the game comes on, they turn on the remote and they're watching it. And that, to me, defines the NFL and its popularity. I think their popularity is despite itself in a lot of circumstances. With the NBA, I think both commissioners, I think David Stern was a great commissioner. I think Adam Silver's been a very good commissioner. Stern doesn't get much credit. Silver does. Why is that? I don't know. People kind of forget the 2011 lockout. I was covering the league at the time. It was ugly, and it was really ugly from a player's perspective. The owners knocked down basketball-related income from 57 to 51%. They did a lot of things the NFL is accused of doing, but for whatever reason, lack of education, lack of paying attention, what have you, people give that league a pass. I can't explain it, and that you sort of have to blame some of the reporters more than anything else.
Speaking of the lockout, John, I remember one of the things about that lockout was going into the lockout, the NBA was losing a lot of money. They were grossing one number, but they were netting a much less number. And it seems like they've really made that turnaround. Now every NBA team is worth $1 billion. You know, what is the actual ceiling for the NBA though? Because we know that TV ratings regionally have gone down for the NBA, even though that the popularity of the league has stayed the same, whereas the NFL had a major bounce back in their network cable TV ratings this past year.
Yeah, and that was the thing. You're right. I mean, the NBA claimed at the time, I think that 22 of the organizations were losing money, and that's
right.
What kind of spawned the lockout. And that's why they knocked down the revenue sharing from 57 to essentially 50-50, which has turned it into a profitable league. But what people also don't realize is since that time, there's also been a dramatic, massive spike in television revenue, which has nothing to do with the owners or the players. It's just those sort of television rights have been escalating to the point we all sit and we all watch, and I've talked about a lot. When does this balloon burst? To this point, it hasn't for the NBA or the NFL. When it does, and it almost has to, because these companies are not making money, the TV end of it, it's going to be ugly. It really is.
Well, John, really quick, one of the examples of this is look what Disney is doing. Disney has invested billions of dollars, not into their television properties per se, but into their ESPN Plus platform and into the movie side of the Disney Corporation. They're actually spending less money on their television platforms, whether it's ABC, ESPN, and those television networks. Their money is going to digital and movies. That in of itself should tell people that, you know, these network and these corporations, they're already trying to get ahead of what's coming.
Yeah, and to this point, the one aspect of television that has been bulletproof has been live sports, and it's not just the NFL and the NBA. You just mentioned WWE. Even they got a huge spike in their television money during the last round of negotiations. And the ratings for all these things, including the NFL, which, as you correctly pointed out, kicked up a bit this year. But if you compare it to, say, 5 years ago, it's still down dramatically. So everything is down and keeps going down. However, the one thing television people consider a lock in the fact that they know there's going to be a certain number of eyeballs for a product is live sports, and that's what's generating. So it's more of a niche audience, but they think that audience that does watch is more valuable because it's the only audience they can guarantee.
Give him a follow on Twitter at JF McMullen. John McMullen joins the Sports Bash every day on 97.3 ESPN. We'll be back in his 4 o'clock slot tomorrow when Mike Gill returns to the Sports Bash here on 97.3 ESPN. Check out all of John's work at 97.3ESPN.com. John, appreciate you joining us for the potpourri of topics today.
All right. Thank you, guys.